Why, Curt Doolittle?
Nice to see you on this auspicious occasion. I have water, not coffee.
Me too. See?
So you haven't congratulated me yet on being off of caffeine, I don't think.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think that's a wise thing to do right now. Curt, you're doing a great job.
Well, I have no idea if it actually means anything or not. I don't notice any difference at all.
That's interesting, isn't it? It's like, okay, what does that mean? I don't know. Just keep on doing it doesn't mean anything until
Doesn't mean drinking decaffeinated coffee doesn't bother me. So
that's all right.
anyway, so I guess you have some. Go ahead.
I haven't tried it. I might have to try it now.
Well, you got kind of a bunch of energy in general.
I don't know. I'm just like I'll give it a try just as an experiment.
Um,
Report back. That's for the audience.
I'm just surprised because I thought I mean, usually if I didn't drink coffee, I'd get a headache. But I had one for 2 days and it stopped. And that was it. And now I can't tell the difference. I just can't. I mean,
Yeah.
what I noticed what I like is there's a diuretic effect to coffee.
Yep.
Right. And so I like my stomach likes coffee. So if I get up and as long as I have the hot thing to drink, it's fine.
So I did this thing. I did an experiment with this very function. I put empty Keurig container in there, no coffee, just makes hot water, and just drank hot water. And I found that I like the hot water.
Yes.
It's a hot liquid is sufficient to satisfy the whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Which is like, okay, it's like interesting psychological gyrations.
It's sort of like soup, you always, one of the things that I notice living in the East is it's like there's something wrong with you if you eat a sandwich instead of soup. Right? A sandwich, those are bad for you as a common. You're supposed to have a cooked meal, and you should preferably start your meal with soup. And it's funny, but and they have a couple of kinds. Of course, they have the beet soup and the meat soup are the two basic substances there. And I mean, I got into it. I mean, soup is good food, right? And so, in that sense, why wouldn't hot water be the same thing for your body, right? I don't know.
It's a base of stone soup.
I can't do tea because however the caffeine is stored in tea, it stays. Whereas I've heard of so for me it stays. Whereas the caffeine in coffee, I work through it fairly quickly. That's very interesting. Anyway, rather than talk about coffee,
what's a side note for the audience?
That was a side note for the audience.
We could talk about this little video that I sent you.
You sent me a video.
It was very terribly interesting for me to watch. And what I think the thing to do is to share the video with the audience first.
Does that make long?
It's only 90 seconds. And then I will present my interpretation of what is occurring in operational language. And I want to hear your impressions about that.
Do I have to be serious?
You don't have to be any more serious than you choose to be.
Okay, so who's playing this video?
Well, you are because you're recording.
I'm just asking. I'm making sure.
You're not host of this adventure.
I got to open the thing. You got to go to my email.
You have to share your screen. Yeah, open it and share your screen.
I got to go in here. Did you know what happened, Brad?
What?
Long form tweets broke on Twitter today.
Then what happened?
And so I feel crippled.
Why?
Like because I can't write in short form. Doesn't make any sense.
But now long form has opened up, yeah?
This is the bug. They're doing something and it put the bug in.
Oh.
All right, so I'm going to try to figure out how to do this. And I'm going to do it. I want to do it so that it's easy for the people to see. let's do this one. Let's go this way. We're gonna move you up here. And we're gonna maximize the screen. And then I'm gonna share the screen.
Okay.
I have to go back to Zoom. I have to share the screen. And there it is.
Okay.
Is that the
There
one?
it
Yes. What an interesting introduction.
It's awesome.
All right, I assume that this knows how the sound comes across. I haven't done this
See,
before.
we haven't tried that yet, have we?
No, so let's try it.
Oh, it did not come across.
Oh.
Oh, there we go.
After that, then what happens is the culture, the next three demons show up. The first is Asmodeus. He's the demon of homosexuality in men. Then there's the demon of Leviathan, which is the demon of homosexuality in men, but of the masculine kind. These are the women who are heavy on the heels, we would say. Okay. Then there is the spirit of Lilith, which is the more seductive form of female homosexuality. After those have gained ascendancy in a culture, which, by the way, if you look at the cultures, every single culture is pushed in this direction. Okay. So historically, not just ours, but historically, this is always the progression. Once you have fornication, you end up with contraception, and then the upshot of that is homosexuality and then abortion. Baphomet is the fifth one, and he's the demon of child sacrifice, abortion. In our culture, think of this. They shot down the fornication laws, and so they delivered us into the hands of Baal. Then they had Roe versus Wade and delivered us into the hands of Baphomet. And then they allowed gay marriage. And so now our country politically is in the hold of the top 5 demons in hell other than Satan. They delivered us into their hand.
All right. Now that's interesting. So I'm going to go over this again, just what he said, because it was so short. And I doubt the audience has been taking notes. But I will give them an opportunity by talking a little bit extra right now to give them time to get a pen and a paper and prepare to take some notes. Isn't that nice of me?
You're kind, man.
Kind of you, sir. So the first one is fornication is allowed or legitimized or delegitimized, right? Which is to say is now allowable under the law. So legitimized, which is fornication, and that's under the deity named Baal. He says Baal, B-A-A-L. That word in Hebrew means the master, the one who controls and owns.
Mm-hmm.
It also means, interestingly, it means husband, it means master, and it means intercourse. There you have it. Now, the next 3 you mentioned, Asmodeus, Leviathan, and Lilith, are about homosexuality. We can skip them. And then Baphomet is the final one, which is the god of child sacrifice, or also known as Moloch. Okay. Now, the issue is here, this is an interesting function, because what are these describing? They're describing the legitimacy of potential human behaviors in a social environment.
Okay.
So it goes like this. When you legitimize these behaviors in the social environment, you have now unlocked certain occult potentials. Okay. Now he talks about these as demons. And I will change that spelling to D-A-E-M-O-N, which is operational programming for the bots in the background that are doing things that you cannot see. Does that make sense?
Sure, our intuitions, yep.
And so it's like this. Is that what you call that?
And they're animal intuitions, yep.
So it's the name of the name of the function. He calls a demon. He calls the name of the function is exemplified by certain human behaviors and their legitimate function in society, as opposed to repression by the laws. That's all. Now, I think that's about all I have to say.
Well,
I will mention this about Baphomet, because Baphomet is located in Boston right now. The Temple of Satan is in Boston at an address that is knowable and look upable. They do take visitors. They have a large statue of Baphomet there. And these guys are recently, since we're talking about child sacrifices, like they said they want to perform ritual abortions in New Mexico as a churchly rite. Now you know. Okay, now I'm ready for Curt's commentary on that short little talk.
I can't, in order to comment, I have to ask why. Because you know, you got to for the audience. This is Brad has studied
Goofy stuff.
Well, you've studied a lot of what we would call religious history, or the way the occult nature of it, etc. So Brad knows Hebrew, and he's looked at the words, and so the problem is I can't step into that frame.
So this is I have to give you the frame to consider. It's the issue is this is what I wish you to consider is the function, operational function of creating a name as an identity with which to handle reality in an operational sense in the material world. So
what you're saying, I'm going to science, right? I'll science it, right? Because you're right. I've told the story in the past of that our brains originate in what's called embodiment, knowing where our bodies are and moving around. Every single thing in our brains today, all our thoughts, evolved from how to move around, and specifically how to hunt something or how to return to our nest. Right? I mean, it's everything. That's really not much. It's how to move, what to identify, how to move our bodies, what to identify, disambiguate the space around us, and how to navigate. Now, we do this in layers of extraordinary complexity to where we're, engaging all sorts of logic and mathematics and sciences and stuff. But really, there's like three things our brain does, right? That's all it does, right? It's very simple, and everything's just an increase in complexity from that one thing. So we start out at one thing with embodiment. So what does that mean? We can understand, even before language, we can understand people and their body language and their motions. And so the way that we express this even before and then into language is we then see the world, then, because everything that's important to us is social, right? We then anthropomorphize, right? We use embodiment to predict the world around us. So to say archetypes and narratives, right? An archetype is a set of personality traits. Those personality traits correspond to basically what we call instincts and intuitions. Right. And so whenever we're reading a story, we don't think of it this way, but some authors do, as they say, this character has these archetypal personality traits, and then will form this way, behave this way. And so that's why there are certain very common archetypes. You just brought up the example of Baal, the male, the master, and sex. Well, they're all related, right? I mean, it's a dominance expression, sexual expression, etc. So that's an archetypal expression. So we start out, most things being most accessible to us are in anthropomorphic form. So anything we want to understand about man can be best understood by a character in a narrative, and that character's psychology. So when we say, okay, we used to explain the universe as the will of gods, right? Or spirits is what spirits is originally the first thing, because we thought of the dead first, and then gods evolve out of that. So we think of the world of spirits. Well, what is that? That's anthropomorphic intent behind the world, right? But if you look at what we've done, we moved from anthropomorphic intent to reason, to empiricism, to science, to logic, to computation, where where you and I work is the other end of the spectrum. But it's taken humanity along, 50,000 years at least, probably more like 100,000 years to get from, because I don't know, anthropomorphism to computation, right? It took us a long, it happened mostly, it's a logarithmic expression, but right there. So when you say, is this a meaningful way of saying it? It's like saying, are comic books not a meaningful way of teaching about good and evil? Of course they fucking are. Right. Right. So what the thing that's about that you do when you take something and make it sacred, right, is that it's held to a higher standard.
Yes.
Right. And when it's held to a higher standard, we don't think of it this way, but what sacred means is you don't have any rights to it. Right.
Okay.
That's what it means, right? You don't have any rights to it. And by the way, if you screw with it, we're gonna make it. We're gonna hurt you. That's what sacred means, right? So when you say this stuff, I'm listening to him, and I'm saying, okay, he's using this archetype to relate to that, which makes it understandable. And these are incredibly emotional reactions we have. They're not abstract intellectual things because there's this arc, right? I hope I'm not losing anybody, but
I'm good.
We started out with anthropomorphism, right? Embodiment and anthropomorphism, anthropomorphic explanation of the world. We got all the way through, mythology, through myth to philosophy, to empiricism, to science, to technology, engineering, and eventually to computation, right? But somewhere there's a top of that curve.
Okay.
There's a top of that curve where this is about as far as we can go and still feel it. And then as we go beyond the top of that curve, now you have to purely think it.
Right.
So there's a maximum utility. We always say this. Nobody needs to understand what we need to understand. They need to understand the rules. And what we'd like them to understand is we'd like them to understand the stories that explain those rules. And then we'd like to see them themselves as a character in that story. Because that way they'll feel it. It'll become intuition. And intuition is stronger than reason. One of the things I try to teach constantly is that the part of our work is to try to change, educate, or train, or discipline our animal instincts to be rational. And we tend to think, well, that's only rational, right? But you think that because you've trained your animal instinct that that's the way to look at the problem. But you wouldn't have thought about the problem that way before. The same thing is empirically. The same thing is scientifically. And the same thing is computationally. Of course you wouldn't, it's hard to make somebody think compute. I mean, look at all the work we do. And you say, it's like takes years to understand what we're talking about, right? For educated, informed, experienced adults, it takes years, right? So what do we expect from most people? Most people, we want to give them the means as most accessible, intuitive, and emotional for them that places the least burden of reason on them, so that their reason develops on top of those morals.
That's right.
Right? We want their reason to develop on top of those morals, as if those morals are gravity, laws of nature. Does that make sense?
They are.
Well, I mean, there's 500 dead gods for a reason.
Right.
We only talk about the ones that survived, and we only talk about the civilizations that survived. But civilizations that chose bad gods, bad strategies, they're dead. They're gone. So we don't see them, but out of sight is out of mind. And that doesn't mean they didn't exist.
That's right.
So the gods that survive are gods that are theoretically least false,
Right.
Among them. So did I make my point there?
I think so.
Is that And so you were saying, so I was curious, what is the reason you found this churchman's?
Yeah, it was interesting because it was like I'm watching him use language in a very parsimonious manner, and using as in a metric fashion, because he's a natural progression. This demon, this demon, this demon, this demon, that demon, and now you've got all five.
Right.
And it was interesting to me because he measured each one was a measure, and it was descriptive language. It was not anything else.
Okay. So, but why did that resonate for you?
Well, then what I did was I was thinking about this on the way home from work, and the issue was I thought of this as I was looking in the Hebrew dictionary again a little bit, and getting some resonations through there, and it was it occurred to me that there's a trifunctional nature associated with the original institution of the civilization, the founding institution of the civilization. And there's also this roughly breaks into the trifunctional nature of Noah's sons in the Old Testament. Okay, Noah's sons settled in different areas, and there's three brothers. Hang on, I wrote them down because I knew I would forget them. There's the Japheth, who is Europeans, the Shem, who is the Semites, and Ham, who are the Hamites from Africa. And they have different strategies.
Mhm.
And they exalt different people to be the first elites. And so the Shemites chose the feminine magical thinking.
Mhm.
The Japhethites chose the militant male correspondent with reality.
Yep.
And the Hamites are on their own program.
Oh, the Hamites just chose pragmatism. There's no ideology behind it.
Whatever works.
Whatever works in the moment. So, which would be the vertical axis, right? I mean, it's like that. So you're pointing out the trifunctional nature. Okay, so I'm trying to accomplish is I'm trying to explain to the audience why you found this interesting. All right, interesting enough to say I want to talk about this. And the thing is that so I understand how this explains to you. So you can put your head in the mind of these people, right? That's very clear to me. I can't, right?
Oh,
well,
I said, oh,
I can't. So because I see the world not by what people think about it, but as what causes them to think the way they do. I see it outside in.
That's fascinating. I'm interested in the words that we use to parse it out, and the reason we use the logics and grammars that we do, and then the construction of those as tools within the frame.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I'm interested in is the construction of the words as tools within the social framework.
Correct. I understand this. So the thing that everybody settles on, all right? So let me see if I can do this analogy correctly. So we all know the back of the brain is perceiving and the front of the brain is doing. I mean, that's the symbol part of it. But it's more complicated than that because the whole thing works from the back to the front as a bunch of just an increasingly precise division of labor down to this, right? Right. And so I always use Keanu Reeves as an example, right? Right? Not a very verbally articulate person, but an incredibly physically talented and socially aware person, right? And he's kind of funny because his physicality in movies is so successful, partly because his lack of verbal acuity, right? But some of us, so that's a physical, some of us are very social, That's the next step up. We see the world very socially, right? And maybe we have some verbal acuity. And some of us see the world very procedurally, right? Very process oriented, systems oriented, which is mechanically. And this is just, where is your attention focused? Right? What part of your brain are you keeping open for it? And given that there's a friction from back to front, the tendency of women, the feminine, the social, is to do this back and forth, right? And be highly affected by the dominance of all that social information. Whereas the masculine there's less, anything emotional has to go way down to the corpus callosum to get across this. And it's like it's like to the game of Frogger to get an emotion across the street. Right? So the frog, not many emotions, because not many frogs can make it across the street. So men are mean, lean problem-solving machines, right? And so this is just to create an example of, you can start out with, you can form just like we all have an equilibrium of body temperature and hunger and sleep and all those stuff. We actually have the equivalent of what makes us feel stable mentally: physical, social, right? Verbal, interpersonal, verbal, and sensory, and physical manipulation. So it's not complicated. I mean, if you understand how simple the brain is, this isn't really, because it's just it's like it's wrapped around this way and it goes from there to there, and you either go sideways, it's a lot, or front to back, it's a less and faster, right? I mean, it's not complicated. So now, likewise, what we just described is there's a need for embodiment, communication by embodiment, right?
Right.
There's a need for communication, understanding by emotion. There's a need for understanding by, think of it as narration, or by discussion, or systematizing an action and craftsmanship. That need, right, roughly follows the arc of the brain, because it's just a hierarchy, right? It's like passing one thing to the next. It's like, in football, you can pass only once, but you can lateral as many times as you want. Well, realistically, your brain is just passing around laterals all the way from the back to the front, and whenever it says I'm tired, it stays there. And that might be right. Social, it might be emotional, it might be physical. Right? You don't fucking know. So that becomes your resting phrase.
That's right. That's interesting.
So what they teach you in Buddhism is to make that resting phase way the fuck back there with your heartbeat and your breath.
Okay.
Right. And what they teach you with religion is to make it up there in feelings. And what they teach you in, say, Stoicism is to make it up here in your verbal reasoning. Right. And then what they teach you in, trying to think of something, like for those of us who would be who other Christians call atheists, it's in knowing, right? It's a knowledge, right?
Other Christians call us atheists,
right? Yeah, I like not an atheist.
That's not quite correct. That's just an error.
Yes. So the point is, if we have people across that spectrum, we have people that need that spectrum of means of communication, right?
Right.
It's you can't. I mean, we can't just like go talk to everybody. And I mean, it's funny because Michael and I talk about math a lot, right? And he's put something out, and it's like, we're talking math now. This math is the mathematics of behavioral behaviors, right? And when you and I talk about trifunctionalism or ternary logic, we're talking about the logic of the universe expressing itself in the different behaviors. But I mean, that's pretty abstract, really, isn't it? I mean,
very abstract,
right? So I mean, can everybody handle that? Well, they might be able to handle it if they started out with myths and parables. They went to they went to archetypes, parents.
Wow.
Then they went to myths and parables. Then they went to history and literature. Then they went to history, and then they went to
Right.
basically rational philosophy, then went to empiricism, then to science, then to with science and mathematics are the same thing, and then computation, which is operations, right? So it's like each one of those things is harder to get to.
That's right.
Right, it takes more or it takes more to get to. So I always say, well, the people that say you don't need a religion, I'm like, well, you're wrong. You need a way, because you're saying you don't need a religion. It's false. Okay, I'll agree with that, but you still need some way of training the child, right? Some way to get there. And the more important part is religions and parables create a standard of weight and measure. Right, standard weights and measure are normally helpful because they allow us to cooperate with least friction and least misunderstanding, interpretation, and possibly retaliation or disgruntlement.
Right. That's right.
So, so in the sense that when you said it, I'm like, well, when you sent this video to me, I'm like, well, that's talking in base human. That's the first level of human language.
Right.
Right, that's the simplest way you can convey something.
Right.
Is by archetypes, right? And the importance of archetypes versus individual cases is they're generalizable.
Yes.
In other words, they're a standard of weight and measure. Now they're a standard of weight and measure of character, right? So they're a way of judging other people. So these are actually really important things, right? I mean, could we do it better than we do it today? Absolutely. Right. Can we do without it? Well, you see what happens when we do without it is people go find it some other way that's worse. Right. I mean, that's what the Marxist to woke series is, right? They're going after some falsehoods that are scientific falsehoods that are actually evil, instead of some theological analogies. I won't call them falsehoods, right? That are actually good. And we know they're good because they survived for thousands of years, because the gods that didn't survive because they had bad morals are dead. Right? It's not.
That's funny.
So,
I find that to be very funny.
So when you get to this, it's like, well, I'm sitting here listening. I'm like, does people understand why we need religion? Now, and again, that's the problem of the word religion. Religion should mean a group evolutionary strategy reduced to a set of a mythology, which contains the metaphysical value judgments that enable the group evolutionary strategy. Right. Now, in order to do that, you need some means of reinforcement.
Right.
In other words, you need rituals, oaths, and celebrations. Why? Because what are those for? They're to create equality among people who are actually unequal, so that they all adhere to the same standard of weight and measure. Now, we don't want them to think about it. We want them to feel it.
That's right.
So we put them in a situation where, like dogs, they're going to feel it. Right? So when Stephen says we don't need religion, I'm like, if you don't make one, you're going to get one. And it's going to be worse than the one you made. Because the ones that are made, we forget that some pretty smart people spent hundreds of years grinding this stuff through.
Perfecting it, right.
Yeah. Grinding it into fine whatever, right? And leaving something left at the bottom.
Right.
So, Buddhism was probably better when it started than where it is now. Christianity was better before the church got hold of it. You know what I mean? Islam was better before they formalized it, because it was just wisdom before then. It was one of the books of wisdom.
You end up with the humans seeking their own self-interest as opposed to the group evolutionary strategy.
Correct.
Interest.
So, like anything, religion is a resource that can be put to good or ill, right? So anyway, I like this topic, despite the fact that if the viewer looked at that thing, they're like, I don't understand what's going on or why this is important, but actually there's a profound lesson to be learned from it. Is if you're a kid, you understand that. Right? Because those characters, we don't repeat Baphomet and Baal and what's the one?
Yeah, the other, yeah, Moloch.
Okay, what? Moloch,
Moloch is one of them.
Baphomet, Baal,
Asmodeus, Leviathan.
Asmodeus, Leviathan. Yeah. So, I thought it was odd how we described Leviathan, but so
I found it interesting as well.
yeah. So anyway, so if you know those characters, like people know like Thor and Superman, right? I mean,
Right.
and Superman and Thor are archetypes. They're actually demigods in the Western tradition, right? They're demigods. They have supernatural powers, right? They have super normal powers, but not supernatural powers, right? And so in history, that's how Europeans have looked at things, as through demigods that are the real people we follow, that we worry about, and which like Odin and Thor and Freyr, and right, these are demigods technically, rather than gods in the Abrahamic sense. Like Skyfather is a god, or Zeus, right? But they bring Zeus down to being almost demigod by his humanization, right? So this is more very Western. Whereas what the Jews did especially is they try to make, and the Muslims did more so, was make God ephemeral, right? It's intangible, not
right.
And we forget that the Japanese don't really, and the Chinese don't really have this, right? They only have spirits, right? And so there's this interaction of the Indo-European and the Semitic, creating this whole God conflict thing we have between Europe and Semitia and India. So, I think from a civilizational perspective, the reason I think this conversation is important is because there's a tendency for us to, in the post-industrial age, or becoming in the industrial age, to industrial manufacture everything the same, to treat people as equal, as if they're industrially manufactured components, and they're not. I described how the brain works, right? We know how the sexes work. We know how the ages work. We know that the race and class differences are basically rates and depths of maturity, right? I mean, we're all different enough that we need a portfolio. And I say it as, well, we need education across the spectrum, and we need to say that we need an economy that's sufficient for the people who want to be serfs. Slaves is a bad idea. I mean, no, technically military or slaves, but you have serfs, right? And you have freemen, you have citizens, and you have sovereigns. And the truth is that some people aren't fit for the survival in the market economy without extraordinary stress and hardship to them.
That's right.
Some of us would rather die than be told what we're going to do today for work, right? Right. I mean, I'm way too fucking disagreeable. I mean, I can't even work for somebody. I have to run my own companies because I'm so disagreeable. I mean, why would I do that? That would be stupid. I can't do something I consider stupid, right? I don't care who tells me how to do it. So some of us would do that, and some of us are like, well, I don't really need anything except to have rule of law around, and I'll make money for me and the population, and everybody else, and I'll pay my taxes, and and we'll all be happy. So we have this idea, this equality myth, that is the problem, right? Which I don't know if you and I talking about. There was a staff meeting talking about this. Talking about this issue.
I think it was a staff meeting.
And then we have the second problem, which is that this oneness method of industrial production of children is like the second problem. When we don't need education, we need tutoring. Very, very big difference. So in the end, Brad said, I want to make a short video. And I said, if you start me on this fucking topic, I'm going to talk for 2 hours. So I'm going to shut up now that I've spent 48 minutes on it.
That's not bad.
That's not bad.
I wanted to make a shorter version so that would make some a difference, and see if we detect.
Oh, you want to see if we can attract more attention by.
There's a difference by making a difference. That's all.
You're such a smart man.
I do my level best.
So did we get across?
I will admit that I'm an employed physician, and I told my brother back when I was 22. I told him that I couldn't work for people, and it upset. I couldn't work for anybody, and it upset him. It's for the same reason. But I got beat up enough trying to do that in this profession that I learned my lesson. And I just am I am surfing. I say it. I'm
Well, the profession is turned on you.
I'm paying my debt to society.
The profession is largely turned on you. You're not exactly suffering in the low income bracket, though.
I'm not complaining.
Let's not go that
That's
far.
not what I'm complaining about.
Yes.
They don't bother me too much. Anyway, let's just end it and then we'll start a new one. We're going to do the Constitution.
Did we accomplish what you wanted to accomplish?
I think so.
Okay. That's
No.
my version of yes.
Oh, hit like and subscribe and do hit the notification bell. And don't forget to leave your glorious commentary.
Thank you.
I'll see you in a minute.